It's poetry time with Cam.
You've got a stinger for all of our bits now. I love it. We got to get you a soundboard so you can just like click on them.
You didn't say woo that time, though. You
always say woo? Oh. Oh, no. You got to get me a recording of woo at the end, too, so you can just play it.
I have a very short and sweet poem for you today. And again, it's interesting how we don't talk about trans masculinity as much on this podcast because neither of us is a trans masc person. And so I thought this poem was really cool, just as a shout out to our trans masc audience who we love and support. And this poem is called Free. It was posted by Casey on hellopoetry.com. And here it goes. A man so flat and boobless, you could skip him across a lake like a prized stone. I showed my surgeon the text post, and she said, "We'll get you there." Fuck right, she did. Staring into the mirror, I see all of me. Mortal boundaries declaring who I've always known myself to be. Thank you for all of your support throughout the years. Finally, I am free.
Wow. That was very short and sweet. And my brain is broken. It's so good.
It's so good. Just that opening line really, I was scrolling through and it just caught my eye so quickly of just like a man so flat and boobless you could skip him across the lake like a prized stone. The whole poem could have ended right with that line because it's perfection. It's perfect.
To whoever wrote this poem, I'm so happy for you and I'm so glad that you can be skipped across a lake as a prized stone and that your surgeon was so supportive of that.
It's incredible.
Oh my god. That's amazing. Hi, I'm Anna, a transgender person.
And I'm Cam, your dad.
And this is The Transgender, a podcast chronicling my transition.
And a cisgender man learning how to support it. Today we're joined by Professor Ray Briggs, which we're really excited about. And Ray, it sounds like you and your partner or somebody who you're working with just recently wrote a book. We'd like to talk about that, but we actually want to start with the question we ask all of our guests to start off with, which is, tell us everything about yourself.
Well, that's going to be a long... let's see.
That's okay.
I'm a philosophy professor and I love philosophy, and I'm a giant nerd who likes to argue. Try not to be a jerk about it. I'm mostly excited about talking about ideas and taking different perspectives. I have a beautiful dog whom I love very much. I'm non-binary.
What's your dog's name?
Blossom.
That's cute. I was expecting...
Blossom. Like the 90s television show?
Yeah, so I adopted her and she had that name and I thought it suited her, so I didn't change it. This wonderful, ambiguous name.
I was expecting something like Homer or something like that, like really drawing in from those philosophy roots.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, I interrupted you as you were saying your identity. What are your pronouns?
They, them.
Okay.
Yeah, I say non-binary or genderqueer or whatever tag fits at the moment.
We love that.
Great. Remind us where you teach and what your specialties are.
So I teach at Stanford, and I've for most of my career done metaphysics and epistemology and philosophy of probability. My collaborator, B.R. George, and I wrote this book about gender because we were both thinking through it for ourselves, and then we had all of these intellectual questions, and we're both huge nerds.
I'm sorry.
I met them.
Did you say that you are...
Oh, yes, go on.
That you are a professor of philosophy and probability of philosophy? Are you a D&D nerd?
So I'm only a little bit of a D&D nerd. I haven't had time for a campaign in years, but D&D is great. I also used to LARP when I was a teenager.
Amazing.
Oh, yeah.
We have matching
We're
D&D
not anti-LARPing
tattoos.
here.
Oh my gosh, that's the cutest thing. I love that.
Total nerds here, too. So that's why we thought you'd be a good fit for the show.
Thank you. You've been correctly categorized.
Okay, so you were talking about you and your partner in this have written a book. Tell us a little bit more about that. What is this book about? Where can we find it? Things like that.
Yeah, so it's called What Even Is Gender? And that was what we were asking ourselves. We were we are going through this thing and everybody says stuff about it that doesn't make sense to us. And we're philosophers, so our standards for making sense are a little bit persnickety sometimes. So we were how do we make sense of this experience? And we spent years, we wrote a paper that was really hard to get published because it was both this analytic nerdery and also this trans stuff. And everybody disliked at least one half of that. And so by the time we got around to saying we should just write a book, we both had like several years of being out and transitioning under our belts. And so we wrote the book for our earlier selves, like what would have helped us. We were both trying to figure ourselves out. So yeah. Oh, and the book is from Routledge University Press. And
Okay.
we've had a little bit of trouble accessing the open access version, but there will be an open access version that anybody can click and read an electronic
That's
copy for free.
amazing. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Talk about something that's
what
really
a cool thing to do.
important. A guide to what should young trans people be doing, a very big audience of ours, and then allowing them to get that for free is incredible. Those just don't exist out there in the world.
Yeah, and like it's not a comprehensive guide, but it is a resource, and I want it to be out there. And also, like I was able to get research funding to pay the open access fee, so of course.
Oh,
like,
that's
no-brainer.
amazing. Yay. So for all the roadblocks you were getting with that paper, maybe you're getting a little more support in the book, which is fantastic. So tell us a bit, just highlights reel. I know from the talking points that we were provided ahead of this, I know that one of the areas that you are focusing on is this idea of the mainstream discussion around gender. And we are actively tackling transphobia. That's part of what we work on in the Transgender podcast and the work that Anna and I are doing. How is it that this conversation is causing transphobia in society? It seems like there's a correlation that you've made there.
Yeah, so we basically think that the kinds of questions you are allowed to ask and like the vocabulary that you can use that will be intelligible to a mainstream audience, and like also to a lot of trans people who get their concepts from the same like reservoir as concepts as everybody else. That stock of concepts and questions often enables you to conflate things that then enable you to make transphobic leaps of logic, and also make it hard to say some of the things that are important for describing. So the book is really about critiquing the ways in which like our available language is not doing as well. Like it
Yeah,
could be.
I mean, as a person who fights transphobia basically for a living now, and as a passion, education is what we use. And is that kind of the same lens that you take? Is education is one of the best tools to fight transphobia?
It's one of them. So like I see what we are doing as a part of an effort that requires a lot of different strategies. So people who are out there doing like legal activism or health activism are part of the same project. I am not able, because no one person is able to do everything. So I feel like making sure that trans people are legally protected, especially in the US, is like a big deal right now. But education is another part of that big deal.
We think of things as nuanced and in a multi-pronged approach too. So my employer focuses on the legal side of these issues. Anna and I work on the education side. But it sounds like you're talking about maybe dismantling some of the norms or the ways that we think and talk about being trans or gender nonconforming. I'd love for you to talk just a little more about that. Like, where does the book go with that?
Yeah. So one of our big ideas is that like the concept of gender is multiply ambiguous. And also the concept of gender identity, while it has been of like strategic use sometimes, encourages people to conflate things in ways that are confusing. So it encourages people to think I have to have one single identity inside of me, and that has to explain how I feel about my body, how I feel about how I'm categorized, and how I feel about which activities I engage in. And those preferences for real people just come apart, and it's not a strike against trans people or transness if you don't conform to a really narrow idea of what your gender identity has to be in order for you to be a person who deserves access to medical transition, or like for you to be a person who can be like accepted and correctly gendered by their friends.
This is something that I really have a lot of personal experience in, having DID and being a person who has a lot of different people inside of my brain, but also being a person who hasn't always necessarily found one label to fit myself. I'm not a woman fully, but I am a woman, and I'm not a fae fully, but I am part fae, and I'm not like, I really enjoy hearing you say that there is this nuance and that it's okay for people to explore and experiment with this nuance of who's allowed to have different identities. And everyone is allowed to have multiple and different identities.
Yes.
And for the baseline, like trying to educate the public about who you are as a person, you had to lean into I'm a woman as just because societal understandings and norms are not creating space for you to be gender expansive, you have had to just say, okay, let's just start with I'm a woman. And then we can start digging into more nuanced ideas like gender nonconformity and fluidity and that sort of thing.
I give trainings. I don't know how much research you did into us, but I give trainings. And the thing that I start with is saying my identity. And I do that to give people an idea of like my credentials, right? Like, why the hell should you listen to me as a person? And one of the things that I love to throw people off with is saying I am a demi-fae queer trans woman. And it throws people off so hard, and it gives them this is not like the usual trainings that I'm like obligated to take for my work or something. Like, this is gonna be a trip. And I want to know, how do you tackle this in the book and kind of in your personal life? Because it seems you identify as non-binary, maybe a little bit of genderqueer. How do you explore that in your own identities and when you're talking about this?
Yeah, like the point you're making about audience, I think is like a point that I've thought about a lot too. I don't think that everybody needs to know the full extent of who I am, or that's a possible thing to convey. So I'm like, what works in this context? And for a lot of like interactions with strangers, that is, they will either decide that I am a man or decide that I'm a woman, which is not entirely predictable, which they will do for me at this point. I'm happy with that. I'll just go with that. I'll be like, you have decided this is not really the topic of our conversation. The topic of our conversation is I'm trying to pay for some groceries. I'm happy being whoever you want me to be to pay for some groceries. Like, we don't have a personal relationship.
Let's make the social interaction as short as possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's that level.
As an introvert, I agree with that in all aspects of my life.
Yeah, so there's that level. And then there's, I think with people who are like a little bit closer, I'm a professor, so I'm allowed to be a little bit weird. So I say, use they, them pronouns, and then people will pick either he, she, he, him, or she, her pronouns, like seemingly based on how long they have known me. And I'm like, all right, I've told you what my preferences are. In a lot of contexts, I don't really expect there to be the space for them to be listened to. And I have to decide whether that's a subject matter that I want to argue about. And a lot of the time it's not.
I think that's valid.
Yeah. Picking those battles is...
Yeah, I think that's entirely valid. I think that it's not... You have so much other stuff going on in your day-to-day life that, like, it's not something that you are like, oh, I'm gonna sit here and nitpick about my pronouns. And I think that is a different take from the world that I live, which is, no, you're gonna use my pronouns. And if you don't, I'm gonna call you out on it and explain the shit away to you. So I think it's important to have both.
And yeah, I feel like your strategy, Anna, actually is something that, like, having a lot of people doing that makes my life easier, because then somebody who is just going to decide what I am without consulting me has to worry about whether I'm going to push back. And so I feel like I'm benefiting from that labor from others, even when I don't have the energy to do it myself.
I tell you what, it takes energy.
It is exhausting.
Yes.
That leads me to something that keeps coming to my mind, and I think maybe is addressed a little bit in key points, but would it just be better if we got rid of gender? Is gender important to societal understanding and how we relate as human beings?
So as the, like, obnoxious academic that I am, I have to be like, it depends on what you mean by gender.
No, we love that. Nothing is cut and dry.
Yeah. When people say that and they mean the arbitrary rules that we expect people to follow based on a category they were assigned because a doctor looked at their junk when they were born, I think we could do away with those expectations. That'd be great. But I also think that we can do away with the physiology of our bodies. Like, we just live in bodies. And those bodies do have various, we say sexed biology, because we don't want to be like, oh, there are two sexes and everybody conforms to one of them, because that's just manifestly false.
Yeah.
You're going to have some junk or other, your chest is going to look some way or other. And it's silly to think that we could or should eliminate differences between people in those respects. And also, people are going to have different things that they like that our society right now thinks are really gendered. And it's great for people to enjoy various, like, wearing a twirly skirt, wearing, like, a suit and tie. Like, those are all great. And also, I don't think that we need to demand that people stop calling themselves, like, genderqueer woman, man. I'm clearly not going to make an exhaustive list, but gestures broadly.
No, but I think that this is important too. I am a trans femme person, and it has been a struggle for me to find my own identity and to figure out, I'm still always figuring out, like, what is the vibe that I want to go with? What is the, like, persona that I'm giving out? And so, like, I wore a blazer the other day, and I got sirred, and I was like, what about this makes you look and think, that's a sir right there?
And your blazers are all very feminine cuts, so it's not...
Like, also, all the women in my world are wearing blazers. It's normal academic attire.
I'm curious as to what, do you believe in this nuanced professor look at the world? Do you believe that there is a place for a nuanced, I am a woman, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I am, like, a woman? I might be a demi-girl, or I might be something like that. Is there that place in the philosophy world of this?
So one of the projects of the book is to explain how that place is possible, and to clear room for it. Like, sociologically, I think some parts of the philosophy world allow you to inhabit that place and some don't. Like, that's as a question of, like, how academics conduct themselves. It depends on what conference I'm going to.
That's very valid. That is, again, knowing your audience.
No, I love that. Yes.
I am curious as to then, how do you talk about gender to audiences who aren't necessarily ready to talk about gender?
It sounds like some of your students are not quite ready to talk about gender quite yet, or understanding of your world.
Yeah, so my strategy has been, like, if I'm going to talk about gender, I'm going to seek out an audience who is ready to hear what I have to say. If somebody says something that I think is transphobic, I've been working to speak up and say, hey, I think that is transphobic. I do not want to have a long argument about it. I want you to know what I think, because I think the long argument doesn't actually change people's minds, but the saying, hey, I saw what you did there, does. So I don't want to do philosophy that bores me. And I feel like a lot of the philosophy that's about refuting transphobic arguments is not intellectually interesting. There are trans philosophers who are doing really cool, sophisticated stuff. And I'm like, why? If I'm going to teach 101, I want to teach, like, metaphysics 101. That's fun for me.
This is an interesting thing. Like, once you have identified yourself in the world, you sometimes get then pigeonholed into, then all of your work has to be completely around what your identity is. And you're like, no, I'm really interested in philosophy that is not related to my gender identity. And we find that in the work too. I'm a cis guy, and it's every room I walk into, it's, will you talk to us about queer rights and transgender issues? And I'm like, I just want to have a sandwich. Live a normal life too. But the unfortunate thing is, we're in a time in our world where these things are being talked about all the time, negatively, in a very public light. And so it's built in that, especially those folks that are trying to support us are like, quick, tell me all the things I need to know about supporting the queer and trans community. I'm like, that's not why I'm here today, but thank you for that. So I imagine you experience that as a professor, of just, as soon as people identify, they're gender nonconforming, that must be their whole world of things that they think about and teach.
Yeah, I mean, I do to some extent. I have some weird advantages, because when I was in grad school and kind of up until my early 30s, I assumed myself and was assumed by people around me to be, like, a straight woman. And so I think I got passes, and I got a lot more room to just be a person. And so that is now, like, a remembered part of my history. And I think it's way harder for people who are out earlier to carve out space for themselves.
I can tell you it is.
Yeah.
Something that we talked a little bit about, it's not always about having the conversation. And as much as I want to say, I understand that, and I also am in that same category, it is impossible for me to not have those conversations. Because it is, one, what I do professionally, but two, I am a public trans person, and people come to me with all of their things. They're like, I think I'm trans and I don't know what I'm doing, so how do I go about this? And I'm not saying...
I always have time for that.
Exactly.
I always have time for that one.
And I'm not saying that I don't like it. It's just, when we're talking about this finding your place and your niche in the world, where you're like, I was perceived to be a straight woman, and so I could just fit myself into where straight women were existing. I didn't have that. I don't have that privilege necessarily. And I think that part of the reason why I'm so able to target these conversations and target these transphobes is because of that, is because I don't have a spot where I can be like, okay, I am just Anna, I'm just a woman today, I don't need to be Oh.
Yeah, you got nothing to lose anyway.
But I am curious then, how do you see other colleagues or other people who you're working with kind of in that same category of they are being that pigeonhole into talking about gender and talking about the philosophy of gender and don't have that space to retreat to?
Want to get started with podcasting, but not sure how to get your content out there? All you need is a computer with a microphone, a quiet space to record, and Buzzsprout. We launched the Transgenda on Buzzsprout to easily distribute to every major podcast platform with just a few clicks. Plus, they provide a great-looking podcast website, audio players for other websites, detailed analytics, and more. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners. Join us and the 100,000 other podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Go to transgendapod.com/buzzsprout or click on the affiliate link in the show notes to get started for free. Plus, you'll receive a $20 credit if you upgrade to any paid account, and you will also be supporting the Transgenda. That's transgendapod.com/buzzsprout.
Yeah.
Or even, I just think about our BIPOC colleagues who are doing education in the world, and they teach a wide range of things, but the community expects of them the labor of, you need to tell us more about how we can be supportive allies of the BIPOC community. That's not what I do. So yeah, I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, one thing that I get to do is just ask young trans scholars and BIPOC scholars about their research, and I can do that like in front of people. I can be like, oh, that idea you had, that was a good idea. I feel like if you do have a bit more power, it's a good soft intervention to just be like, hey, listen to this person. They're smart.
I love that. I gave a academic talk to about 75 different physicians yesterday, and it was intimidating, I'll tell you what.
She's been stressing about this for a month now.
It is that being invited into a space and having those professionals who are working in the space being like, hey, I see that you are really good at what you do. Can you come and tell us about the thing that you're doing? Is that something that you experienced when you were growing up in your career?
Yes, I had amazing mentors, and I kind of want to take a leaf from their book about how to be a mentor. And they did do a lot of just, it's funny, like when I was in grad school, and like still I think sexism in like academic philosophy is a thing. Like I think it's gotten better, and I think women in previous generations who I've talked to have just way worse horror stories than anything I've experienced. And transitioning has made this weird because I do see how people defer to me more just when I'm perceived as a man, and it's super creepy, and I don't like it. But I had a lot of mentors who...
handed privilege because of how people perceive you is very interesting.
I think he said being...
Oh, sorry. I could see my internet breaking up.
I think he said something along the lines of being handed privilege because of how you're being perceived is an experience that's uncomfortable for trans people, especially for trans masked people who have seen that a little bit more in their lifespan.
Yeah, and like I didn't think I was experiencing sexism, and then the shift, I was like, oh no. But like also that said, the thing I wanted to say was that like a lot of my mentors did just treat me as a person and just asked me about my ideas. Low bar, but like I know a lot of women in philosophy who've gotten hit on by like men who were supposed to be mentoring them, which is super gross, and nobody ever did that or gave me the feeling that they were going to do that. And
that's really good. Yeah.
For sure.
It's interesting. It's something that I haven't really talked a whole lot about. When I transitioned, I lost a lot of that privilege. I lost a lot of the being deferred to. And this is why we always say that trans rights are women's rights, trans rights are reproductive rights, trans rights are X, Y, and Z, because we all experience this and we all are fighting against the ingrained patriarchal structures. And I get ignored. I get talked over all the time by people who don't know anything that I'm talking about. And so it's interesting to see that dichotomy and that shift, especially in my own life being a trans woman.
Yeah, I've heard this from like other trans feminine friends, and it fits with the patterns that are emerged from my experience too. It's really upsetting.
It's an interesting thing to be respected and talked to as an equal, and then have especially cisgender white men, fill a room with their presence and not hear a single word of what you're trying to tell them.
Yeah, it's super scary going the other way and being like, thinking that you're going to things are going to get worse for you because of transphobia. And then because you have less of the sexism,
Right.
get worse. And you're like, oh my God, people going the other way are going to have a really awful time.
You're seeing it with such clarity because it's hyper-focused. You've had both sides of the coin experiences, which is, I think that's powerful because then, again, how do we change things to make that less an issue for people? So thinking back to you saying the gender piece of what you do is not everything, I would love, we're just nerds here. Tell us about philosophy and your work and its implications in society here. I'm really curious about what are you researching right now? What are you, aside from the book, where is your brain at
Give
in
us
the world
the
of philosophy?
point one of metaphysics.
Yeah, exactly. You could probably give us point two. Anna and I are pretty obvious.
I've actually been thinking about impossibility. And so conditionals, which are if-then statements. Philosophers have a bunch of, I think, pretty good theories about how they work, where you have your model of the world, and then you have something that's not true. So I didn't go outside without a mask this morning because the air quality was terrible. And I might say, if I had gone outside without a mask, then my lungs would have burned. And so I have to take the actual situation, and then I have to change it so that I get like a situation or maybe like a bunch of possible situations that are like the actual situation, but I go outside without a mask and then check whether in those situations my lungs burn. So that's like a kind of philosopher's model of how conditionals. But then what if I try to suppose something impossible? So I'm like, if I were a unicorn, I'd be really sparkly, but it's really not possible for me to be a unicorn. So there's not really a possible scenario in which I'm a unicorn at all. So like, how do I modify the actual scenario to get a possible scenario where I'm a unicorn if there is no such possible scenario? So that's the kind of puzzle.
Oh, this is fascinating. I also want to say, I think that you can be a unicorn as your like internalized sense of gender. I just also don't know what that looks like if you're sparkly or not. Like, I don't know. Do you have to apply glitter? I don't know.
Yeah,
Do you feel sparkly, Anna?
I glitter like a vampire in the sun.
Yeah, you do.
So Anna, your proposal is like one of the possible philosophical avenues of response, which is just to expand your sense of what's possible.
Yeah,
right.
I didn't even think about that. I just wanted to. I think I want to share to the audience that being a unicorn is an acceptable thing that people can do in their life.
I also love that.
We're pro-unicorn.
That's beautiful, and I love it.
Ray, we've talked a lot about a wide range of topics. Is there anything else that you feel is like important for our audience to know about you? Anything that you feel our audience should know about? I don't know, philosophy or gender or anything.
Oh, geez. I didn't prep very well for this.
Yeah, we
one.
love big questions.
Like big, broad questions.
Yeah. As far as philosophy, I think that like a thing that has come up a couple of times that I maybe want to like harp on a little bit more is that being able to imagine and expand your idea of what possibilities there are is just a really valuable activity that sometimes gets de-emphasized both in our world and in philosophy. And I want everybody to find like their various creative ways of doing that.
Expanding what you understand is possible. I love that. That's amazing. And that's a great thing to end this on, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Ray, before we let you go here, thank you so very much for being on our podcast. I think our nerdy listeners are going to be very interested in what you've had to say. Where can we find you in the world? And where can our listeners find you?
Oh, so I'm mostly pretty hard to find on purpose, but Stanford Philosophy Department has a page for me.
Excellent.
Yeah, go look up the book. Look up my papers on philpapers.org if you want to read about like nerdy probability things. Also, philpapers.org is a great database. It's a completely open access, open source. Not all the papers are open access, but it's this beautifully organized, like crowdsourced philosophy database.
Oh, that's amazing. Gosh, I love talking to academics who are like, here are free things.
Yes,
Yeah,
also Stanford Encyclopedia. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a beautiful free philosophy resource. Also, Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Amazing.
Yes.
Love that. Where and when can we find What Even Is Gender in the world?
So it is currently published with Routledge, and it is available at Routledge's website. I don't know when the open access PDF will actually be available, but that is coming soon, and you can order the ridiculously expensive hardcover that is for libraries, or what I recommend, the paperback, which is about $40.
Okay.
Or wait for the open access.
Awesome. Yeah, if you are at all interested in philosophy, go check out Ray's work. It's incredible. And thank you, Ray, for being here with us and talking to us about gender and philosophy.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you, Cam.
It was an amazing interview with Ray today. I learned so much, and I highly recommend you all go check out their work. It is amazing.
We don't talk about philosophy enough on this podcast.
We really don't. It's a disservice to all of you. We should talk more about philosophy. No, go follow Philosophy Tube. She's amazing. And also trans. Gender euphoria today. This one comes from our Instagram. Just out of privacy, I'm not going to share the name. So this is from Anonymous. I love your podcast because it gives me not only your transition story that helps me understand my daughter, but also helps me be a better parent because of Cam's perspective. I found you just when I needed it the most, so thank you for being so open, and please tell Cam how much his experience and support has helped me be a better parent to my daughter.
Oh, it's so sweet that you chose that one for today, Anna, because it was like such a tearjerker for me of that particular call out. But I'm only a good supportive ally to trans people because of you, Anna. It's a two-way street that got us to this point.
I'm only here because you were supportive of me.
Oh, yay! Supportive all around. But thank you, listener,
supportive
for sending
all around. That. Yes, thank you. It was very impactful when we first saw it.
If you have questions about transitioning or supporting someone who is transitioning and you'd like us to talk about it on the show, please shoot an email to questions@transgendapod.com. Click the chat with us button on our website or DM us on social media. And hey, when I say social media, I no longer mean Twitter. I think we're going to leave that platform because it's horrible and toxic. But you can find us on Blue Sky now. And of course, Instagram is our primary place where we post all the good shit.
Instagram has all the good shit.
If you'd like to support the show, you can become a patron on our Patreon.
Shout out this week to Amy and Clara Reese, longtime patrons and very good friends of the show. Be sure to check out our episode description for links to resources on today's topics, including Ray's works, and then the poem about skipping your top surgery across the pond like a well-oiled stone. Not oiled, what? Prize winning? Something like that.
Yes, a prize stone, exactly. And thanks for listening. I've been Cam.
I've been Anna.
And this has been The Transgenda.
Love you all, except the bigots.